the pigeonholes of each delegation outside of the conference room. Ladies and gentlemen, this final special session of the conference, Moving Forward, Civil Registration and Identification Systems as Smart Investments, has been organised by the World Bank Group, and I am honoured to turn over proceedings to Dr. Ulrich Zachow, Country Director for Southeast Asia of the World Bank Group, covering Cambodia, Laos PDR, Malaysia, Myanmar and Thailand. Dr. Zachow.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a privilege for me to be here today. And I first of all want to give a big thanks to ESCAP, to the co-organizers, UNICEF, UNDP, UNFPA, UNHCR, the WHO, ADB, and Plan International for organizing this successful first ministerial conference. Civil registration and vital statistics can form a foundation for development and for good governance around the world and also in this region especially. They are critical to ending extreme poverty and for boosting shared prosperity. Those are the twin goals of the World Bank Group. And they are smart investments. Several countries around the world and in this region have now linked national identification systems with birth registration. One example is Botswana. Botswana has the Omang system. Omang means, who are you? And you will hear about the experiences in India, in Timor, Leste, and in Laos on our panel. And you'll also hear from Tim Costello of World Vision. So globally, despite these efforts, some successful, some beginning to gain track and being implemented, identification and civil registration globally cover only a small fraction of the population in low and middle income countries. But without such system, it's really hard to measure progress with, for example, reducing maternal and child mortality or improving financial inclusion. Now, there's good news. We do have the tools today. Communication and information technologies, here, cell phones, they allow many countries to leapfrog to affordable and cheap and efficient smart systems with privacy protections. On Wednesday, the youth held a special session, and I would like to endorse their call for action to register every child, including the hard to reach, including the vulnerable, including the marginalized. And doing this will help secure their future, and it will help the future of the young nations in this region. In May of this year, the World Bank Group and the WHO, in consultation with many of the agencies who are represented here, published the Civil Registration and Vital Statistics Scaling Up Investment Plan for 2015 to 2024. We estimate that scaling up and sustaining civil registration in 73 priority countries will cost $3.8 billion US. And we identify a $2 billion global financing gap over those 10 years, excluding domestic financing in those countries. Closing this gap, making civil registration a reality, is a priority for all of us. And we in the World Bank Group are looking forward to working with development partners toward this goal. Our panel session today will provide a platform to discuss how countries can get everyone in the picture, the Ministerial Declaration, and how to implement civil registration and vital statistics in Asia and the Pacific. I would like to pose 3 questions as a backdrop to this panel. First, can we make universal civil registration and vital statistics our goal? The youth asked for registering every child. I'm asking, can we make universal registration a goal for all of us? Some countries have already done so. You will hear about this. And by when can we do that? How can we, governments and development partners, get there? What can we do specifically, concretely? How to mobilize additional international resources is the last question. So it's my great pleasure now to hand over to our moderator, Ms. Gwen Robinson. She is a senior fellow at the Institute of Security and International Studies at Chulalongkorn University here in this wonderful town of Bangkok. And Gwen was previously with the FT, the Financial Times, as a senior editor and foreign correspondent. Gwen, all over to you and to all of our panelists. Thank you very much.
Of all the issues that you're here discussing today. Timor-Leste, and last but very not least is Tim Costello, Chief Executive of World Vision Australia, which is carving out quite a role way beyond Australia's borders in CRVS SV, but he will tell you about that. I'd just like to kick off the discussion very briefly. We've got a room full of representatives from countries at very different levels of development on these issues in CRSV. So I'd just like to ask each of our panellists to give a very quick snapshot of where it is in their country and whether these goals, as Ulrich said in his three excellent questions, whether these goals are realistic, the commitments and the targets. So perhaps we'll start with Laos at the end there.
ขอขอบใจนำท่านประธาน สปป.ลาวก็เป็นประเทศหนึ่งสั้นขอว่าเรื่องเป้าหมายในการจดทะเบียนการเกิดนี่มันเป็นเป้าหมายบริมชิตของรัฐบาลสปป.ลาวและยุทธศาสตร์ของกระทรวงสาธารณสุขแล้ว
For Lao PDR is our goal birth certificate and is also mentioned in the strategy of the Ministry of Health of Lao PDR.
เวลาพวกเขาจะกำหนดให้ได้ปีได้หรือพวกเขาท่านสามารถกำหนดได้เพราะว่าพวกเขาจะมีแผนสู้ส่วนพยายามแต่บรรทัดสำคัญและพวกเขาต้องมีการสนับสนุนจากหลายประเทศโดยเฉพาะในทุน
Yes, to asking about when we can have everyone get registered is also a very difficult question. However, we have a strong commitment to try our best on to achieving this goal, and it's also we also some extent rely on the support from the international organization in order to implement our goals. That's all.
Thank you. And Minister Richard.
Thank you so much. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'm very happy to share this special platform with you all. And on very important matter, we are discussing this subject with regards to civil registration and vital statistics. And in India, we have a huge challenge. As you know, we have a huge population still. A gap of 13% for birth registration and 33% gap for the death registration. So we need to really get up and fill up that gap. For that, our new government in India has set a very ambitious target for ourselves. We are sure that with our commitment and dedication, we will achieve that. Just to mention what our government has initiated with. As I mentioned yesterday, our motto of minimum government and maximum governance. We want to reach out to the people, and for that we have to create a robust registration system in place. And I'm sure that with the commitment we have given to ourselves, we will achieve that. And personally, on my own side also, I will give full attention to this purpose. As a country of huge population, our agenda is not always easy to, formalize. But when we set ourselves a goal, we will achieve that. Now we have given a goal set as a mission, the Vision 2020. That's 4 years ahead of the ESCAP mission, the target of 2025. So we have tried to set ourselves much advanced so that we can not only help our people and our youth, but the whole world. Because if the India changes in positive way, it will help the whole world.
Thank you very much. We hope to hear more detail of that in a short while. But over to you, Minister Babo. Not working.
Thank you very much. East Timor is a relatively small country with 1.3 population. The government has set a vision of Timor-Leste becoming a middle-income country in 2030, and of course we have started working on the registration, beginning with the first census on 2000 and the second one on 2010. We break down all the census into different elements, and of course civil registration has begun prior to 2010, but given the difficulties in the country, we haven't been able to resolve the issue completely. But what happened is that before 2010, we've been able to register almost the birth rates, almost 90%. But we still have problems with death registration, and of course the Ministry of Health have also intervened, trying to introduce a new proposal to begin to conduct assessment on the quality of use of birth, death, and cause of death. These actually are part of the whole, I think, project that actually is being done, and we hope to achieve much more complete information very soon. And of course, what is actually being proposed by the chairman today is achievable, and Timor-Leste will surely can make it happen.
What the commitments and the targets?
Yep, that's true.
We'll hear more about that later. And Tim, you're not exactly speaking for a country, you're involved in many countries, so that doesn't give you license to talk for the next hour, but maybe you could give us your thoughts.
Sure. No, World Vision works in over 100 countries, so I'm not a government official, but I have great pride in saying that World Vision since 2010, as a child-focused organisation, says we celebrate a child's birth and we register the child. In fact, the registration needs to be linked to the celebration. And culturally becoming an absolute norm. World Vision's work in these countries says how is it possible to have child protection or child health or child education if you can't have registration, and that access, protection is fundamentally linked to this right. I might just finish by saying I was a participant at the G20, part of what's called C20, civil society, which I led in Australia and for the G20 nations. The two great themes that came out of the G20 2 weekends ago were transparency and addressing inequality. So, when you aim for 2% economic growth, because growth is patchy and there's 600 million unemployed young people, women aren't participating as they should in the workforce, and you actually look at the blowout between rich and poor, if you got 2% growth that just flowed to the richest, who already are the top 1% in profits, not in jobs, not in 2% growth to the poorest countries, what good is growth? So the G20 had a very strong focus on inequality. The second focus was on transparency, saying why do ordinary people pay their tax, but it's optional for rich people. It's optional for rich countries. Now, it seems to me that this CRVS registration is fundamentally about inequality and transparency. When there's 230 million who aren't registered, 50 million a year, this entrenches inequality. It's about transparency because when you're registered, you're seen and you have rights, and the social contract of your rights as a citizen can actually be played out, which is why I think this is one of the galvanising leverage points for achieving certainly G20 and United Nations MDGs.
Thank you. And with dealing with these countries, are you optimistic that at least the commitments will be met by the end of 2015?
What's amazing about the G20 is for the first time ever, so you can get fine statements where everybody says, ministers with all respect say, yes, we're there. For the first time in the G20 communique, they have signed up to an accountability mechanism where their homework will be marked by World Bank and OECD. In other words, they won't be able to come back next year in Turkey, where the G20 will be, and say, oh, well, we just made a statement. There will be a scorecard. And that's something that, as we get commitments here, we should think about here also.
It's progress. So I'll turn to Minister Santivong for the first specific question. Considering that the implementation of the Ministerial Declaration will require effective cross-sectoral national coordinating mechanisms, how would you plan to engage the other ministries and government agencies in your country?
ขอบใจปัจจุบันรัฐบาลสปป.ลาวได้สร้างตั้งคณะกรรมการประสานงานระดับชาติเพื่อจัดตั้งปฏิบัติการจดทะเบียนและสถิติพลเมืองแล้ว
So regarding to the coordination, the Lao government has already established the National Coordination Committee.
ซึ่งประกอบมีกระทรวงภายในกระทรวงป้องกันความสงบกระทรวงการต่างประเทศกระทรวงยุติธรรมกระทรวงสาธารณสุขกระทรวงศึกษาและศูนย์สถิติแห่งชาติกระทรวงแผนการและการลงทุน
So this is consists of many sectors such as the Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Public Security, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Ministry of Health, and the Statistics Bureau under the Ministry of Planning and Investment.
ผมนั้นอยู่ขั้นท้องถิ่นเพราะก็ได้มีการแต่งตั้งคณะประสานงานขั้นท้องถิ่นคือกัน
As well as the establish the subnational committee level.
เพื่อจัดตั้งปฏิบัติแถลงการรัฐมนตรีครั้งนี้พวกเขาจะมีกลไกในการประสานงานระหว่างบรรดากระทรวงต่างๆ
In order to implement the target of this Ministerial Declaration, we will set up the mechanism, the stronger mechanism of coordination.
คนอื่นหมดมันได้แบ่งความรับผิดชอบให้แต่ละกระทรวงตามพระบทบาทของแต่ละกระทรวง
We will clearly delegate the responsibility to the different sectors according to their roles.
เพราะนั้นกทพ.จะต้องได้กำหนดแผนการเคลื่อนไหวประจำปีประจำไตรมาสและดำเนินกองประชุมประสานงานคณะประสานงานเป็นปกติ
As well as develop the annual work plan, quarterly work plan, and have the regular meeting for follow up the progress.
เพื่อติดตามและกวดการปฏิบัติหน้าที่เวียกงานและตกลงปัญหาสำคัญในแต่ละระยะ
Yeah, in order to follow up and also assess the progress and make the joint decision on the issues.
การสั้นเพื่อรับประกันให้แก่ฮอดปี 2024 เนี่ยพวกเขาจะต้องเฮ็ดอย่างใดอันนึงมันพวกเขาจะสร้างเป็นยุทธศาสตร์ระยะยาว
So in order to complete the goal by 2024, we will develop the long-term strategy.
เพื่อเป็นบนอิงให้แก่คณะกรรมการไปจัดตั้งปฏิบัติ
In order to be the roadmap of the different sectors to follow.
2. แม่นสร้างและปรับปรุงบรรณานิติกรรมที่เกี่ยวข้องเกี่ยวกับเรื่องงานการจดทะเบียนและสถิติพลเมือง
Revisit and develop some regulations, law related to CRVS.
3. แม่นพ่อจะสร้างฐานข้อมูลเกี่ยวกับสถิติพลเมืองที่สามารถเชื่อมโยงกับบรรดาคณะกรรมการอยู่ขั้นส่วนกลางและท้องถิ่น
As well as develop the database system in order to be integrated or connected at national level, subnational levels.
4. และมันสร้างความสามารถให้แก่พนักงานวิชาการที่รับผิดชอบเรื่องงานการจดทะเบียนพลเมือง
And of course, the capacity building for the staff who work on CRVS issues.
บรรทัดสำคัญมันต้องได้โฆษณาเผยแพร่นิติกรรมเรื่องงานนี้ให้แก่พลเมืองเราเห็นได้ความสำคัญของการจดทะเบียนสิทธิพื้นฐานของตนตามกฎหมาย
And it's very important point we have to disseminate the information, the benefit of the registration, let the people aware and understand how it can protect their rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Turning to Minister Rijiju, with your massive population, I'd like to ask you about the monitoring challenge and India's unique identification program known as the Aadhaar project. It's the largest ID project of its kind in the world currently. So how is your government ensuring the identification program is integrally linked to the national CRVS program, and what are the issues in monitoring in a country the size of yours?
Before talking about the monitoring, let me quickly mention two important things which we have initiated. One is to create a better environment to launch all the plans successfully. We have launched this massive e-governance system called Digital India. And another is, for the first time, we have created a separate ministry for skill development. So it's to provide skills to the youth. So that is a basis on which we are going to move forward. And to talk about the monitoring, we have a national action plan. So on that, let me mention some of the important steps we have taken is for the development of uniform software application for the registration of births and deaths. And then there's a creation of database of institutions where events occur. Then we have software application to monitor institutional events, capacity building of registers and data digitization, advocacy and publicity, demand generation, and national population register. So national population register is very, very key to our all objectives. Let me mention this. Under this National Population Register, we have this electronic database of all usual residents of our country. Anybody who is living in India will be recorded there. And then we have this biometric based system called Unique Identification Number, and which is known as Aadhaar, which you mentioned earlier that is the largest project in the world to register the names and individuals. So if a child is born, then the first thing is that we will issue a special identification number based on the unique identification number of the parents, so that the child is given a name and nationality and the registration number. And then we will have the forward movement based on all these efforts. And I mentioned earlier that by 2020, the atmosphere which we have created in achieving our goal for civil registration and vital statistics, I think we should be able to achieve that. I'm particularly very confident that our new government is giving all efforts possible that no individual should be left out unregistered.
As long as those computer systems keep working. I'll turn to Minister Bobo. Timor-Leste has made a lot of progress on the legal side and in registering, you were telling me. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about the lessons learned so far that you can share with other countries and the progress you've made so far.
Thank you. Yes, we do. We have actually made some progress in terms of registration. I think given the size and the smallness of the population.
Can you give us an idea?
It's 1.3 million people. The civil registration, I think, has covered this, particularly on birth, almost marriage and that we've been able to cover almost 90%. The only problem we've come across is that we have been able to publish it online so that it's not visible to others outside Timor-Leste. But let me just also emphasize that our legislation is now in place. In 2010, there's an interministerial memorandum of understanding on birth registration was launched. And then in 2011, let me say that almost 35% of children under 5 were registered through all joint efforts. But then in the middle of that, in 2012, we began to realize that it is not the work of one ministry alone. It has to be an interministerial coordination and to make sure that it's effective. A rapid assessment was done, particularly on the quality and the use of birth, death, and cause registration. And then we began by conducting it, and in 2014 we finalized the draft, actually still zero in the strategic plan, but it's hoped to be finalized soon. And what is happening now is that the government is supported by the WHO, and also we heard inputs from other international agencies. We have completed a first draft plan, and we hope that in the foreseeable future, probably very soon, the Council of Ministers with the Council of Ministers approval, we'll be able to set up a secretariat which will work and coordinate the work. And of course, that is a new and heavy task, but we hope we can achieve that.
Thank you. And Tim Costello, speaking as in your role with World Vision, first of all, can we talk about what role? Sorry, right, I've just cut off. What role should large economies such as Australia play in strengthening the CRVS system in Asia? But more importantly, what kind of role is there for, well, both private sector and NGOs, CSOs? How can they contribute to all that?
For NGOs, CSOs, this registration is fundamental. Just about everything we do depends on the statistics that come from registration. If it's a disaster and children are displaced, separated from their parents, if they haven't been registered, how do you reunite families? How do you get to them? If it's doing health work or education work, without these statistics to know what the numbers are and where the need is, how do you program? How do you plan? When it comes to child protection, if without registration, how do you actually ensure that kids who've been trafficked, who are child soldiers, who are displaced, will actually be found and protected and reunited? So for civil society organisations, not having reliable, accurate data and registration, let alone for governments, is fundamentally impossible. So this is why this is so important. Look, when it comes to thinking about what richer countries like Australia can do, and right at the moment, the politics in Australia is such that we are starting to feel like we're victims, we're poor, we're a developing nation. There's sort of a grumpiness and a fear. But let me say, Australia is still a very rich nation, and my message to our government is that in our region, particularly the Pacific, there is a huge role for Australia. Our staff in Papua New Guinea collected registrations from Papuans, New Guineans in the settlements in Port Moresby, put them in a big box, took these registrations to the office, and you can only register in one place in PNG, it's in Port Moresby, to get these people who aren't registered, and basically the office said, we're overwhelmed, take your box and go. We can't register. Now, when Australia's putting in about $450 million in aid each year to Papua New Guinea, why isn't some of our aid actually building capacity? Because here are the inequality things blowing out, measures blowing out, the lack of transparency, the real denial of universal human rights. The Solomons, a very similar story, and I don't know if we've got people from the Solomons, but when you realise that it's probably under 10% of the population that are registered, you see that capacity and proper funding from richer nations is critically important. We can't simply preach and say, we've done it, you should. We actually have to invest and train and say, this is fundamentally important.
Thank you very much. Just to remind the audience, we'll be taking a few questions from the floor very shortly, but we'll just ask a couple more to the panellists to perhaps get a little more insight into how governments of the region are rising to this challenge. And I'll turn to Minister Saisi about how the Lao government intends to mobilise the financial resources for implementation. Is there a line item budget for civil registration and vital statistics? And what's the role of development partners in your country?
อีกเรื่องหนึ่งขอขอบใจข้าพเจ้าก็จะตอบมี3ปัญหาที่หนึ่งมันเกี่ยวกับสปป.ลาวจะระดมงบประมาณสำหรับการจัดตั้งปฏิบัติคืออย่างใดอิงใช้สภาพที่ตั้งภูมิสันฐานของสปป.ลาวเป็นประเทศผู้ด้อยรวมถึง 80% ของประเทศและประชากรอยู่กระจายกระจาย
So for our answer will be based on 3 points. First is how the government mobilized fund for the CRVS. We will look at the geographic of Lao PDR, that is 80% the mountainous area, and people are living from far from each other.
ฉะนั้นการพัฒนาหลายด้านต้องได้นำใช้งบประมาณจำนวนหลวงหลายซึ่งรัฐบาลเขาก็จะบ่สามารถตอบสนองได้หมดทุกด้านจึงมีความจำเป็นและเรียกร้องขอการสนับสนุนและก็ยินดีครับเอาการช่วยเหลือจากบรรดาประเทศพัฒนาแล้วและองค์การจัดตั้งสากลอื่นๆเพื่อตอบสนองเพื่อประกอบส่วนเข้าในการพัฒนาวิชางานดังกล่าวเป็นต้นเป็นวิชาการงบประมาณในการจัดตั้งปฏิบัติตัวจริง
So there are many development interventions that need a large budget which the government cannot provide for those programs, and it's very important for the support from the development partner to helping us on the development of the CRVS in Laos.
คำถามที่2มีห่วงรายการงบประมาณสำหรับการจดทะเบียนและสถิติพลเมืองและบ่ผ่านมาในรัฐบาลได้สนองงบประมาณจำนวนหนึ่ง
Regarding to another question, whether the Lao government already have the budget line for the CRVS, so far the government has already provided some budget.
เข้าในการจัดพิมพ์แบบฟอร์มคือการออกหนังสือแจ้งเกิดให้เด็กที่อยู่ของหมอสุขศาลา
So the budget is used for publishing the forms, the new forms such as the birth certificate form.
การจดทะเบียนการเกิดและการเสียชีวิตการแต่งงานและการหย่าร้าง
Death certificate, marriage certificate, and other forms.
การจัดพิมพ์สมนครัวและบัตรประจำตัวให้แก่พลเมือง
ID cards and family registration book.
และการกักเกียนสำรวจพลเมืองทั่วประเทศซึ่งจะจัดขึ้นในต้นปี 2015 ที่จะมาถึง
And the budget for preparation of the population census that will be conducted in 2015.
แต่ถึงอย่างใดก็ตามเพราะเขายังบ่ทันตอบสนองได้ตามความต้องการของวิชางานดังกล่าว
However, the budget available are not enough for the need of those interventions.
จึงเสนอข้อการช่วยเหลือสนับสนุนจากบรรดาประเทศและบรรดาองค์การจัดตั้งสังคม
So we would like to propose for the support from the international organization and the developed countries.
สำหรับพระบทบาทของครูร่วมพัฒนานะมีอย่างใดการประกอบส่วนทางด้านวิชาการงบประมาณเนื่องจากการพัฒนารายด้านเพราะเราอย่างจำกัดโดยเฉพาะแม่นคิดความสามารถอุปกรณ์รับใช้และการสร้างฐานข้อมูลนิติกรรมสถิติของพลเมือง
So how the development partner can play the important role on this work, we would need technical supports and equipment because there are many things that we still shortage and of course the capacity building for our staff.
ขอขอบใจ
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And turning once more to India and your challenge there, Minister Rijuju, maybe you'd like to comment on this issue we raised earlier about financing the scale of what you're doing and also the role of, private sector NGOs, if there's a plan that is coming together now on that.
Certainly, with the commitment which we are showing from our government, the budgetary support will increase, certainly. And then we have to ask the state governments in the country to increase their budgetary provisions and to manage better resources. Besides that, we will be looking forward to work with our development partners, especially the World Bank and other agencies there. And then we can look for the private investment from the corporate sector also. So because it's a huge investment required, and we understand that to fulfill the commitment which we have set for ourselves, we will definitely have to mobilize the resources. And that we are committed, and I think we should be able to do that.
I'm glad you're optimistic. Turning to Minister Bebo about Timor-Leste, again, because you're in the legal area, perhaps you could also talk about this issue of establishing and enforcing legislation for CRVS and what some of the challenges have been that you've encountered and how they're being addressed. And if you could perhaps, give some insight to other countries dealing with that. I mean, it's a very sensitive issue on some levels, and particularly in Timor-Leste with its, recent and troubled history in the past.
Yes. We actually did introduce some legislation back in 2004, if I'm not wrong. And since then, I think civil birth registration and civil registration has been compulsory by law. What happened is that because of the sketchy informations left and each ministerial lines actually did, depending on what their necessities are. For example, the Ministry of Health actually were more interested in cause of death or autopsy. The Ministry of State Administration were actually more interested in getting the information of notification of birth, death, the traditional marriages, and support linkages and data collection. And the Ministry of Finance, for example, through the General Directorate of Statistics, were more interested in collection of planning and on policy development, whereas the Ministry of Justice is the one who is leading the registry on birth, death, marriage, and divorce. So the financial resources have been mobilized into each different malign ministries, but we need a concerted efforts. And we are lucky to have also some of our international partners who actually been helping since the beginning. But the point now is how to actually reach out to the people in the very remote areas. And that is the Ministry of State Administration who's looking after the whole territory to get the information. And then if we can actually have this interministerial group through a government decree to enforce it, to make it happen, then I think by in 2 or 3 years' time, we'll be able to have a much more complete information published so that everyone can have access to. But I would like to outline the difficulties that we have come through. given the recent history, but efforts have been made to meet our objectives.
Thank you. And finally, before we turn to questions, the last question for panelists, Tim Costello. Given the experience of World Vision in various countries, not just one, perhaps you told us about the capacity problem and dealing with PNG as an example, but what other barriers to civil registration have you encountered, and what do you think they are? And how can organisations like yours help break it down or help governments break them down?
Yeah, look, I think we've got to admit one of the real barriers is that people are uncertain, even distrusting of the state.
Right.
Their natural affinity or ties are to their family, their religious group, their Wantok in New Guinea, their mob, and the thought that the state has this power over their privacy, that they have to do something when they seem to get little benefit back from the state, is clearly a barrier. And look, in authoritarian states it's probably easier just to mandate birth registration because they have the authority to pull the lever, and whether it's fear or whatever, you know, it will happen. In democratic states, the key social contract is that rather than the state existing so you serve it, the state exists to serve you. And that democratic social contract really starts with birth registration. And when people have a distrust because they say politicians are only in it for themselves, they only go into politics in order to become rich. You'll hear that all the time. They're so corrupt. They are arbitrary in how they use information. You know, if they think we didn't vote for them, we're at risk. So I think that's a really big barrier to say, actually, it is fundamentally important to understand you, when you're registered, are a citizen that can make claims on a state that exists to serve you, is a big barrier. Look, the other barriers have to do with just the point. You know, people in remote villages struggling with food or clean water. What's the point of actually putting effort into going and getting my child registered? We don't ever see the state doing anything for me, so what's the point? So I think it's very interesting. I mentioned tax before in the G20. We know that successful and prosperous societies are prosperous for one reason, largely. They raise 30 to 40% of their gross national income in tax. That's how you pay for education and health and child protection. Poorer developing countries are raising less than 15% in tax. Now, they have so many people in the informal sector who aren't paying tax, who never will pay tax, who can't see the point of the state. Birth registration is actually really important to move people from the informal sector into the formal sector, so one day when they are earning enough they can pay tax and expect reciprocation from the state. The state will use those taxes for health and education and protection and protecting individual rights. So I think those barriers are the ones that we're always working on. Certainly World Vision, in every community where we work, it is you have a voice, you're a citizen, being registered and demanding rights of your state and tracking the money that you know, they've promised is incredibly important.
Thank you very much. That leaves us a lot of food for thought. So perhaps turning it over to the floor, if any distinguished delegates or excellencies or ladies, gentlemen, if you have a question for any of our panellists or generally for the panellists, yes, please. Sorry, I can't read the sign. Sorry, for WHO, please.
I'd just like to follow on from the points made by the panel in that last section. We've heard a lot across the conference about the call for development partners to provide technical support, and also then a call from Bangladesh the other night about the coordination of development partners. And I'd really like to ask Tim Costello his view on a good model now as we move forward for development partners in country and to support the UN ESCAP with hopefully the ministerial agreement around the regional plan. So the model for the various development partners involved in this.
So I think we need to start with a very simple proposition. How can you have universal protection or universal health or universal education when disasters occur, universal rights to humanitarian intervention? How can you have all those rights without universal registration? It seems to me that if you can say the linchpin for affecting those universal rights that we all sign up to is universal registration. So in a disaster, as I've said, how without universal registration do you actually know who's missed out or who gets far more than they should? So I think a development model starts with a philosophical view that this is the foundation for the practice of a whole range of universal rights. The development model then has to be an alignment of government, of the private sector and of civil society organisations, all on the same page. And once in alignment, you can then start to address capacity issues, cultural issues. We know that many cultures don't want to register daughters because they want to marry them off at 12, 13 for 3 or 4 cows, pull them out of school to a guy who's 20 years older, who's got 2 or 3 wives. They actually see their daughters as an economic product. Why would you leave them in school? Because then I'm paying as the father of the daughter, and if she's educated, she's only going to bring value to another family. I'm paying for another family getting value. I'll get a few cows and marry her off at 14. Now, if you've got a birth registration, you can deal with early marriage. You can organise around that right. So whether it's employment or cultural attitudes that have to be challenged, we need alignment around this is the linchpin for all other rights.
Thank you. And I think, Minister Bebo, you had a thought about development partners and finding the right ones, appropriate ones.
Thank you.
Yep, that's working.
I think there are a couple of stages that need to be identified if we all actually want to achieve a common goal. And the first is actually to define the stages in which we have to actually go through, given the particularity of each specific country. This is very important. Some countries are well ahead. Some countries are only beginning to, work. So these are different stages in which I think we have to distinguish. The second is, as I said, identify the stages to achieve, setting the timeline, and fourth, of course, mobilization of resources. And that, if we can actually have, a concerted, idea or effort on this issue, that would be very good, because not every country has the same resources, particular financial resources available, and also human resources to address this specific issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Stacey, would you care to make... No? Okay. If there are any other questions, yes, please. The distinguished delegate from Azerbaijan. Oh, sorry. Oh, you've got the back. Sorry, you were sitting behind the Azerbaijan sign.
There are too many of us here, actually, in this delegation.
Terribly sorry.
That's okay. A question to the Minister from India, actually. A question about the Aadhaar program. Obviously, one smart investment is to leverage investments across a number of programs. So the Aadhaar, the financial inclusion work that you're doing around it is obviously one of them. What kind of incentives are you providing to citizens to come and get their Aadhaar number? That's one question. And the second one is, what services are you actually linking to Aadhaar currently, and what is your grand plan for linking to different types of services. So let's say 5 years down the line, do you see hundreds of services being linked to Aadhaar, or will it be a limited number of services? Since in Bangladesh we are looking at similar scope of service delivery linkage to our CRVS system, it would be useful to know what your plans are. Thank you.
Aadhaar is a universal card which will be given to every individual, every resident in India actually, not the basis of citizenship. So National Population Register, which is the main focus of our body, which is known as Registrar General of India, and that office is the constitutional authority to maintain the population. Aadhaar is a program through unique identification that authority we have created. All our developmental schemes and benefits to the individuals are in future going to be linked through Aadhaar only. That's one smart system based on the, you have a biometric system, iris and all these things. So definitely it's an important card which we want to see that every individual possesses, every resident in India possesses that, and through that we can link with all other things. And besides that, I want to mention that we have recently launched Jan Dhan Yojana, that every family has to have a bank account. So these are, very vital statistical process we are going through, and Aadhaar is going to be the basis on which it will be linked with all kind of his benefits or her benefits from the government, as well as it works as an identity for the individual.
Thank you. It's a very thoughtful question. Now, is there any other questions from the floor? If not, we will turn to, I'm going to ask each of you for what we might call a very short takeaway, your final prognosis on this whole issue. But before that, I actually have a question which I would like to put to a couple of the panelists, which is, when you touched on, we've only touched very briefly on the role of the private sector, and you mentioned, I think several of you mentioned getting the private sector involved. However, what is in it for how do you convince the private sector that, I mean, the private sector is the private sector for a reason, which is largely to make money. So is there a way that you can attract investment in this environment where impact investment is growing and growing, and companies want to be seen to be doing good? Oh, the Minister of Laos, yes. Would you, oh, no? Okay, would you like to, you mentioned private sector involvement actually, and
the title of today's discussion is Civil Registration Identification System and Smart Investment. Right. So investment, it's something I presuppose that people expect return. Yes. And here we are committed to the UN Convention on Child Rights. So it's so important that this is a sector where we should look beyond return. So that is how we are going to appeal the private people and our commitment from the government ourselves also. So this is something we have to look on humanitarian ground, and it's an attractive to say that investment on this particular sector is vital, and we will have to manage that.
But what kind of opportunities can you offer a company?
We have to link with many opportunities, when...
Would it be in mobile technology or...
Yes, so many things.
So they can charge or...
Yeah. We can get involved with so many things with the benefits attached to that. So we have to make it more attractive.
Right.
And it's something government has to provide certain incentives also for those companies who want to come forward and take part in this process. Such as what, like something like well, the government have to work out some kind of incentives for them to come forward.
Right. Yeah. And Timor-Leste?
I think this is an area in a poor country like Timor-Leste, and it should be less attractive to the private sector. Yet, I think what we, the incentive that the government can do, and I think we have tried, is to through investments on the production of materials like the ID cards and all this stuff, then you can actually begin to attract them to come. And but I tend to agree with the minister. It's you have to make sure that you can attract them, but they'll probably aim for a much bigger audience, I think. So there are strategies that need to be formed.
Right, but obviously even in a little country you've got little companies, local companies,
right.
so if there's something in it for them, but they're not not charities, so I suppose you have to come up with an incentive.
Right, I agree with that, yeah.
Can I...
yes, you're coming to you.
Can I add to that? I think there's both negative and positive incentives for the private sector. Look, the negative is brand reputation if they're not involved. We know that you can make profit as a private sector using slave labour or child labour, and consumers get lower prices and you're not paying a wage perhaps at all. But now the brand reputation, if you're doing that, part of the G20 statement was 168 million kids in bonded labour. They will use the $15 to $20 trillion of G20 countries in procurement to get rid of child labour, to say we actually want those children with birth certificates, with rights, and we'll have a negative brand mark against us if we don't. Positively, private sector has really started to understand the concept of shared value, which says you can make a profit and solve social problems at the same time. And the sweet spot of actually saying we are giving back, even as we are making a profit, is a very sweet incentive. Why? Because certainly in developed countries, they're realising that skilled labour, labour that is young, is what they need. You can make money three ways: land, capital, finance, or productivity. For most developed countries, it's now productivity. How do we get people who are trained, who are going to be working for us with an ageing workforce? So there's real incentives for private sector to have shared values and to lift productivity.
Right, and not just productivity, but you're saying that there is a way to get them involved in helping the cause of CRVS in Asia and convince them that there is money to be made and they can do good.
Asia, for developed countries, is their future workforce, already is their workforce. And the truth is that if they hire, they want to know that these people are registered, pay tax, have an identity.
Right.
That's the motivation.
Right. It's an interesting way to look at it. So finally, turning to our summaries, I'd like to ask each panellist for a very, very short final view on what you think are, first, the biggest single challenge to reaching those commitment by 2015, the targets by 2024, and what is the biggest single reason for hope that you will. So on the good and bad side, in a very short snapshot, maybe starting with the Minister Saisi from Laos.
ขอบใจเนื่องจากว่าสปป.ลาวนี้เรื่องการจดทะเบียนกับการจดทะเบียนนี่เขาได้รับการสั่งตั้งในปี 2012 แต่ถึงอย่างใดก็ตามข้าพเจ้าคิดว่าสิ่งสำคัญแม่นปัญหาบุคลากรและปัญหาเทคโนโลยีที่จะประกอบเข้าในการจดทะเบียนและแถลงการเพื่อจัดตั้งปฏิบัติแถลงการ
So thank you very much. For the Lao PDR, as the civil registration and statistics is just reformed, and is start year 2012. So the biggest challenge for us is the staff, the skilled staff, and also technology to use for the statistics system.
ก่อนอื่นหมดแม้ต้องได้บุคลากรต้องมีความพร้อมในการความสามารถในการจัดตั้งปฏิบัติเวียกอันนี้
So we think the most priority is the
well-trained staff on the CRVS work.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Rijuju.
The biggest challenge we face in India is the sheer size of our population. So, as I said, to bridge the gap which we are facing is definitely a huge challenge, and we are rising to the occasion by setting the goal of 2020. And you know, in India we have a large number of floating population, the migrants from place to place, from rural areas to urban, like that. These are a huge challenge for us. We have system in place. Let me tell you, India publishes an annual report on CRVS already, and we have sample registration system which brings out vital statistics twice a year, you know, which brings out the total death statistics also based on this sample statistical registration system we have. But the challenges are going to be there. Even if the percentage is say 17% for the birth registration and 33% for death registration, but the number is big. So to fill that gap, we really need to commit ourselves more. So I hope that this important conference we have here, and we will be going back and double our effort and our very efficient office, the Registrar General of India and the Census Commissioner we have in India to lead this task. And the government is behind it, and I hope that we will fulfill our commitment.
Right, and on the positive side, what makes you the most optimistic that you can achieve this ambitious, 4 years ahead of the 2024 target? What makes you so optimistic? What's the biggest single reason?
Because that is a commitment of the government to the people. And we have to be, all the time sure about our own efforts and commitment. And as a large, second most populous country in the world, India cannot afford to lag behind. That is why we have to make our population, especially the young population, that's the main resources. We have to get the young population dividend. Right. And for that, we have to ensure that we use the greatest resources which we have in India, that's the young population. That's why we are committed to that.
Thank you. And Timor-Leste, the biggest single challenge and the biggest cause for hope?
I would say the three combined efforts need to be done. As we've made some progress in the birth registration, we need more increased enforcement of existing legislation with greater focus on the death registration. We, of course, need to also have a clearer definition and roles and responsibilities of our institutions. And also, most importantly, is the establishment of an interagency committee to implement and monitor the progress. I think these are the most, necessary points that need to be done to be able to fulfill the task.
Right. And what gives you cause for optimism that you could achieve this?
Well, we have started the work some years ago. There is legislation in place. There's a relatively small population in size. It's reachable, and I think we have enough resources, but also we need still help from the outside to help.
Thank you. And finally, Tim, on the plus side and on the negative
Well, look,
side.
I think you'd agree with me that hearing the ministers speak gives us hope. When Minister Rijuju says 2020, 4 years early, I think that's just fantastic. Likewise from East Timor, and I've said to Minister Stacey from Laos that World Vision, we have a big program there, is absolutely committed to partnering to make sure this happens. So where we're running education and midwives saying you can register, this is important, I think that gives us hope. Look, the biggest challenge is I think people think this is just a technical question, it's just a side question, it's just a matter of software. I think it's a profound cultural question. And it goes to that question that I opened up of inequality and transparency to say that everyone who's on this planet has a right to be acknowledged they're on this planet and that they left this planet when they died. And that is a fundamentally moral position that we need to articulate very, very clearly, unambiguously. That's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, it is a very good point. So, finally, just to sum up, I think we've had a fantastic snapshot today of both the challenges and the positives of this big challenge that is being undertaken well in a lot of places, but particularly Asia. And we've heard about inequality, transparency, funding issues, legal issues, and restoring or building trust, and the sensitivity of this kind of data we're talking about, and most of all, building the capacity to put these systems in place. So I think what's very clear is that there's one common thing between everybody on this panel, which is will and optimism to achieve those targets and that commitment. So I wish the panelists luck, and thank you very much for joining us today and sharing those insights. And I hope you'll all join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to the panellists and delegates for such a thought-provoking and optimistic final discussion. Before we break for refreshments, could I kindly remind delegates to complete the evaluation questionnaire seeking your views on the relevance, effectiveness and quality of this conference. We greatly value your feedback, which will help us improve future intergovernmental conferences, and the online version of the questionnaire can be accessed using the link on the screens behind me. May I finally ask that you return to the conference room, ready to consider item 8 of the agenda, adoption of the Ministerial Declaration, to get everyone in the picture in Asia and the Pacific at 3:30.